Here are 10 growth, marketing, and monetization tips in 6 minutes. Tip number 1. The fastest way to grow your podcast isn't by trying to generate attention for your show. It's by pinpointing where your listeners already are and placing yourself in front of them. So instead of you trying to invite a high-profile guest onto your podcast in hopes that they bring in an audience, you find other top shows in your industry and other top podcasts and place yourself in front of their audience by being a guest on their show. Tip number 2. Most podcasts don't grow because their show is broad, unspecific, and unclear. But if you made your show way more specific, your marketing efforts become way more effective because people know who your show is for. For example, we had a client called Bree who was stuck below 200 monthly downloads after a year of podcasting. And her podcast name was Lucid Living, which was vague and unspecific. And we changed the title to Heartbreak to Wholeness, untangling the mindfuck of narcissistic relationships. Once we did this, she 10x her audience and she earned $14,400 in 90 days because her listeners became clients of her show, which was only made possible because her targeting was super specific. Tip number 3. Most business owners who are trying to generate revenue from their podcast go the approach of inviting high-profile guests on their show. The issue then becomes that the high-profile guest you're inviting on the show is now positioned as an expert that listeners should buy from, which means that your listeners wouldn't want to buy from you and will want to buy from the guest. So to fix this, start creating more solo podcast episodes where you provide the value yourself and you're positioned as an expert and authority your listeners should buy from. Tip number 4. People aren't taking your CTA, buying your stuff, joining your free community, joining your newsletter, because you're not giving them a clear reason as to what they're going to gain by taking that action. Give a singular, clear, incentive-based call to action that tells listeners exactly what they're going to gain. Number 5. Most people struggle to turn strangers online into active listeners because they're screaming at the top of their lungs trying to convince every single person to listen. But most of your audience aren't interested in the topic you cover on your show. So instead, you should find online communities where your audience are, post highly valuable content, and then reach out to every single member who engage with that content. This way, you're taking a much more targeted approach and finding a niche community who are in fact interested in the topic of your show. This is how one of our clients added 50 new subscribers in as little as 2 days. Number 6, simply increasing the number of episodes you put out on a weekly basis will not only help you stand out from the competition where everyone else is publishing once a week, but it allows you to remain top of mind. Think about it. What happens to the other 6 days if you have a weekly show that you're not promoting? How are you keeping top of mind? And if you can post, even if it's just twice a week, you speed up the process of like, know, and trust. People get familiar with your voice, they come back for more, and your podcast can grow way faster. Not just because you've increased your output, no, because you have more of the listeners coming back for future content. Number 7, optimize your show for podcast SEO. 4 years ago, when I started coaching podcasters, I was trying to figure out, hey, what's the simplest and most effective ways to grow shows? And I came across this guy called Jake Ward. He grew his podcast to 300,000 monthly downloads in 9 months, which, by the way, still to this day, is absolutely insane. And he did it not by posting, not by promoting, not by even getting guests onto a show. He didn't have any guests on the show. It was simply by optimizing his podcast for SEO. SEO is a process of getting your show ranked high on Apple and Spotify. That's the main platform new listeners go to discover a new show. So ask yourself, what are the specific search terms and keywords my audience would search in on Apple and Spotify in order to find my podcast? Add those keywords to your title, show name, show description, show notes to start ranking and increase your visibility on Apple and Spotify. Tip number 8, likelihood is you're probably posting on social media, probably sharing promotional clips, probably inviting incredible guests onto your show in hopes that it grows, but it doesn't. And the main reason why is not because you need more exposure, is because you have a retention issue. That's what most podcasters struggle with. Imagine you have a bucket with holes in the side. Most podcasters are trying to fill up the bucket by adding more water. But the more water you add, the more exposure, the more the water leaks out because again, you have these holes in the side. So to fix this, we have to figure out a way to get more of your listeners coming back for more. A simple way to do this is by creating a targeted content strategy where every single episode is made with a specific listener in mind and is positioned as a solution to their problem. Tip number 9, growth isn't a straight line. We like to think that we can just keep growing forever and ever and ever and it's going to keep going and we're never going to dip. But the truth is having dips in your downloads is totally normal. 3 years ago, I met this guy called Martin at a podcast conference. He mentioned how he was getting millions of downloads and then after the blue, his listenership would drop by 40%. And then again, after a couple of months, it will pick back up and grow faster than what it was before. And we've seen this exact trend with our clients. Having dips in your downloads or having moments where growth slows down is totally normal. So don't panic or don't stress. Just zoom out and ask yourself, is this a consistent trend? Or did I have a dip for a couple of months and now my growth has picked back up? And then finally, tip number 10. If you want to grow your podcast, it's all about turning more strangers into listeners. And what most podcasters tend to miss is the fact that their show notes is an area new or old listeners will go to when deciding if the episode is worth listening to. Now, most podcasters treat their show notes like an afterthought, so they end up not putting that much effort into it. However, again, if we know that new and old listeners are going to go there, we have to focus not on giving generic advice or bland information or leaving it empty. The entire goal of your show notes at this point, if you want to drive more growth for your show, the entire goal is to convince the stranger or old listener as to why they should listen. So use a simple formula to format your show notes to turn more strangers into listeners and to grow your podcast way faster. The AIDA framework: attention, interest, desire, action. Start by grabbing their attention, build interest around the topic you're going to cover on the show, build the desire for them to want to learn about the topic, and then end with a very simple and concise call to action to listen to the episode. With that being said, those are the 10 tips. I hope you found it valuable. If you did, leave a like. And of course, let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. Peace.